Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. This is Caleb, and I gotta ask, was it worth waiting over 6 years to get Tears of the Kingdom? Now obviously this question might be kind of obvious. Yes. I mean, think about it. This is, for at least what a lot of people think, the best Zelda game, right? And at the very least people think it's better than Breath of the Wild, right? But before we get too much into the details, this is the longest gap between Zelda games. It just simply is. Obviously, this is over 6 years. Previously, there's been ones that are closer, like Breath of the Wild's development. Obviously, Skyward Sword came out in late 2011, and then Breath of the Wild released in early 2017. So it was a little under 6 years, but this one was over 6 years, more than 6 years, assuming you don't count the DLC. And by the way, I'm talking about like new games, because obviously we got like stuff in between, and we'll get to that. But yeah, longest gap between Zelda games. So at least as far as like the mainline ones go. And like I said earlier, this game is pretty much better than Breath of the Wild in every way. At least for what I think most people can agree with. It's got the dungeons. The dungeons are way better. That was one of the biggest complaints, by the way, with Breath of the Wild, was the dungeons. People didn't like the dungeons. They were all the same, pretty much aesthetically and mechanically, and there were no enemies in them. Tears of the Kingdom completely fixes that. There's enemies in the dungeons, and they're thematically more interesting. The bosses are unique. So, I mean, that's pretty much got it down. Of course, my personal opinion about the dungeons is that I wish they were a little bit more complex and linear. I don't really like the structure of go around, press the 5 buttons, and then, fight the boss. I thought that was a little bit lame, especially compared to something like Ocarina of Time, which had a little bit more, a little bit more sort of navigational troubles and stuff like that, trying to find keys and fighting the mid-boss and things like that. And then, of course, the next thing, which is very obvious, Tears of the Kingdom has almost, like, more than double the amount of stuff to explore. Now, obviously, the land of Hyrule itself is pretty much the same. Of course, they rearrange things and stuff like that. But there's also the complete underground, which is basically the entire map, again, underground. Now, granted, there's less stuff down there to do, but it's still a lot of stuff to explore, and side quests and things like that. And of course, there's obviously the Sky Islands, which had a larger focus before launch. They focused on. They didn't even show the underground before launch, but yeah. So Sky Islands obviously a big thing as well. And there's also the story. The story itself is better than Breath of the Wild. I think so. Like, it's vastly better than Breath of the Wild. Breath of the Wild barely even had a story. Let's be honest. Now, I personally don't like the fact that they use tears in this, like they use the memories again. I thought, and I said it in one of my previous videos, I thought that was a decision that, like, they only made it for the sake of having the same structure as Breath of the Wild, which in my opinion was a worse decision. I would have preferred like a more traditional open world story where you just go to a point and then something happens, like any other open world game. And that kind of brings it to another question. This game is a direct sequel in story and gameplay to Breath of the Wild. And that's never happened before in a Zelda game. Where the next game is the sequel, basically. Of course, Zelda 2 has happened and stuff like that, but the gameplay is different, right? And in that case, the gameplay is different. And in every other case where there is a sequel, it usually comes out, it's not the next game that comes out. You know what I mean? Unless you count maybe like the Oracle games, and those came out on the same day, but those are still separate games. They take place in different areas, have different dungeons and all that. But Tears of the Kingdom has the same gameplay and the same map as Breath of the Wild, for the most part. So, and the structure itself of the game is almost unchanged. The weapon breaking system is still there. The cooking and food stuff is still there. The way you equip items and stuff like that, that's still there. The dungeons, like I said, they're still press the 5 buttons. Of course, they're still better, but press the 5 buttons. The way the story is told is the same. Basically, if you had major problems with Breath of the Wild, you weren't gonna like Tears of the Kingdom, because Tears of the Kingdom fixed basically nothing in Breath of the Wild at all, at least structurally anyway. And that might be a problem to some people, because you waited 6 years and you basically get the same game again. I mean, to be honest, my expectations were a little bit... I was hoping your more active story. That seemed to be what we were getting, but apparently not the case. That was my bad, I guess. But it was also kind of their marketing, so... Who's really to blame with that one? And it just seems like obviously it. Who am I to say they should have made the sequel to Tears of the Kingdom or the sequel to Breath of the Wild, not the sequel to Breath of the Wild. Obviously, it's going to be basically the same game, right? That makes sense. I'm not saying for some reason people said it was a DLC, which clearly they're stupid. But regardless of that, and then, of course, like I said, longest gap to get basically the same game almost, at least as far as gameplay and the map is concerned. But it's not the only Zelda game we got in that time. Of course, we did get stuff in between, like we got Link's Awakening in 2019, and that was a complete remake from the ground up of Link's Awakening, and that game's awesome, And then of course we got Skyward Sword HD as well, which is less of a remake and more of just a port, but that's how it goes. It's still a game, and they did improve the game in the sense that they improved a few quality of life things here or there, and then of course the visuals now at 1080p 60, and of course there's like the controls now. You can play with a normal controller, so that's great. And then of course there's Age of Calamity, which another Breath of the Wild type game, but it's completely different. It's a Warriors game, so gameplay is completely different. And of course you can have your gripes about the story or whatever, but it's still a Zelda game that came out. Overall, though, my opinion on Tears of the Kingdom is that, yes, it's a great game, for sure. And on paper, it does almost everything better than Breath of the Wild. However, because it's so similar to Breath of the Wild, and Breath of the Wild was such a unique experience when it first came out, that experience of Breath of the Wild playing it for the first time cannot be topped. It's impossible. I played it at launch. You can't beat that. Tears of the Kingdom didn't even come close to that. Even if the game is better, right? It doesn't have the same impact that Breath of the Wild did. And that being the case, like I said, and you might know this, I've said in previous videos, but I personally had my own gripes with Breath of the Wild. I hated the memory system. I absolutely that was the most annoying problem with me. The story itself, fine, whatever, but it didn't. I didn't like the structure of it, and like I said, Tears of the Kingdom kind of did the same thing, so it sucked again. The dungeons, while they were better in Tears of the Kingdom, same thing. Press the 5 buttons. And then, me personally, one of the major features of Tears of the Kingdom is the fact that you can use Ultra Hand and create vehicles and stuff, right? Well, the problem is you can't really use them unless you get a steering stick, right? You can't really control them, which basically makes them useful unless you have a steering stick. I explored all over the place trying to find the gacha pod or whatever, dispensing machines to find a steering stick. I didn't find one until I was over halfway through the game. So I basically didn't even have access to vehicles for like 50 hours. So that experience was definitely less so. Plus, myself, I'm not that creative, so even if I wanted to use it, I wouldn't really use it for much of anything. I'd make like a basic car maybe. But even then, I'd rather just teleport to one of the towers and like fly down. But that's how that goes. And then Tears of the Kingdom. There's also one other thing that, in my opinion, Breath of the Wild does better than Tears of the Kingdom. In Breath of the Wild, there's a sense of danger. You see the Guardians, you get annihilated instantly until you eventually learn how to defeat them. But and there's always a sense of danger because there is no kingdom in Breath of the Wild. You're on your own. There's camps here and there, but that's it. You're on your own. It's dangerous. Tears of the Kingdom, while the game may be more difficult in general, you're not on your own. Like the feeling of being isolated doesn't exist in Tears of the Kingdom, really, because there is a kingdom. You know what I'm saying? It's kind of hard to convey, but it's the feeling of like danger and isolation that's missing from Tears of the Kingdom. That was one of the best parts about Breath of the Wild, and it's just absent. But my opinion is that Tears of the Kingdom is probably objectively a better game, and they did improve some stuff, but it didn't improve enough for me to be like, it's entirely better than Breath of the Wild, especially without that, isolation part. So, the final question is, and the question posed at the top of the video, was this game worth waiting 6 years for? Me personally, I would say no. Of course, not that we really had a choice, but I would have preferred, if I'm waiting, if a sequel is going to be like this, Majora's Mask style sequel, I would want it to be put out quickly. Okay? Obviously, you know, all these mechanics and stuff takes time, and I get that. But if it's going to be the same gameplay, with the same structure, and the same map, put that out quickly. You know what I mean? It's like, seriously. And if you're going to wait 6 years to develop the game, then it's got to be a new game, man. I understand Tears of the Kingdom, yes, it's a new game. People are going to say, oh, it's not DLC, what are you talking about? Yeah, it's a new game, okay? But look at Spider-Man on PS4. Spider-Man on PS4 came out in 2018, a year after Breath of the Wild. More than that. More than a year after Breath of the Wild. And then 2 years later, it got a sequel, Miles Morales, which of course is a smaller scale sequel. And then it just got another game, again, this year. Spider-Man 2. And that's a fully fledged sequel, and it's similar to Tears of the Kingdom in the sense that it expanded the map by almost double, and it's got a new story, but the structure's the same. But it took significantly less time for it to come out, and there was another game in between. Another new game in between, mind you. And of course, same map again, but you get the idea. Right? I would rather have a new game come out. Now, what do I want for a next game? Like I said, my gripes with, you know, Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, I would prefer a more traditional story. If you're going to do open world, fine. But more traditional story and linear dungeons. Right? Those are the main things. Of course, and I also don't like the weapon breaking system. With that game, at the very minimum, if you're going to have weapon breaking, at the very minimum, have an unbreakable sword, bow, and shield. Minimum. I don't want the Master Sword. Oh, it doesn't technically break. It runs out of energy. No, it just can't do that. It has to be invincible. Okay, even if you get it very at the end of the game or whatever, and it's not as powerful as other weapons, you gotta have an unbreakable weapon, man. It hurts. It hurts to not be able to have that. Basically, that's about it. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. Am I wrong? Am I stupid? What do you guys want from the next game? And are you fine with waiting for... If the next game takes another 6 years, and it's Breath of the Wild 3, will that be worth it to you? To me, no. I need a new game. But anyway, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace.